Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Hello. Good morning.
Good morning and a happy Tuesday, gentlemen.
It's another Tuesday.
Never forgets.
So Tommy was just telling us about some riveting things. He's his morning routine. It is that time of fall.
What are we going to talk about first?
Let's go through our main topic. Before we get into our news, let's go into main topic for today. Thank you, Seth, for keeping me on track. Our main topic for today is connecting Tableau into Microsoft, or particularly the semantic models is a new thing that's Microsoft is rebranding the data sets. But we're going to kind of talk about, where does Tableau play in this game? Does it make sense? Or are there other tools or other ways you'd like to connect into your semantic model in general? So we'll probably open the conversation up more than just Tableau, but we'll start with Tableau initially, and then we'll go on from there. Let's transition into some news. Jumping into some news right away. Seth, you found an interesting article on gateways that was recently published. What is this new feature you found, and what should we know about here from this?
I did indeed, and I'm one of those guys that clicks just cause, right? Because everybody, I think of all of the blog articles that get posted, like new release of Gateway is probably not top of the list.
100%.
However, this time rewarded with a little nugget of wisdom. The new desktop Gateway supports the new querying of the November desktop, which is good. But the larger announcement within there is now you can add a new tenant registration allow list setting, and it's mostly on the machine that you're installing the Gateway, but it is something that hasn't been there before. So if you're not familiar, you can literally put any UPN or your email from any tenant onto a Gateway and just plug into it, which has always been fantastically easy for those of you who are popping around and doing different things. I don't know if they were trying to like throw this under the radar, but it's like, I always love where we're 7 years into a product, and part of the article is, please be advised that this is a good security measure to take, but does not guarantee total data exfiltration. But it's a good security measure. We just haven't had it until now.
And that's concerning.
I mean, it is what it is. It's like you're not going to get access to a virtual machine without the appropriate authorizations, et cetera, et cetera. So
it's another layer in here that
it's another layer. Nice, but
because before it all felt like voodoo and magic before, because you would literally log in with a UPN, a user email address on the Gateway, and be like, hey, I'm going to log into this Gateway, and they're great. And they're like, great, we'll authenticate you. Cool. Then you go into powerbi.com, the service, and it's like, oh, look, it just magically appears. Like, how does it know? Like, what is it doing?
It'll never know. Oh, it'll know.
It'll know.
Yeah, I never thought that you could log into your tenants or domains like virtual machine and then log in with a completely different tenant.
Yes,
and that would be okay.
If you gave me access to your machine, I could say, Seth at Power BI out of tips or whatever.
Yep. And even though it's in the
put in my creds,
BI
and it'd be like,
tenant,
cool, I go out to my service, and now I have access to
that Gateway.
So, I mean, like I said, it's not a huge hole because you'd still have to have permissions to all the data sources underneath, et cetera. But good and bad.
Now,
anyway.
The one thing I'm confused about this article, and I'm skimming through it now as you mentioned it here. Where is the tenant registration allow list setting? Is that inside the Power BI portal?
No, it's on the machine in the H key,
the registry,
like in the registry.
Yeah, I saw that, and I'm looking at it going,
yeah,
wow.
That's why it's kind of like, well, you already need admin. You need to be a virtual machine, like a box admin, to be able to get into the registry. So it's not like, typically if you've got VM set up, you're not going to have access to the registry.
So this is so let me just make sure I understand the feature here, just to get my head around it. This is on the machine that you are installing the Gateway into. You're saying inside the registry as an admin, I'm saying this machine, this VM, can only talk to these list of tenants.
Correct. So this would be one of those things that you'd want to pass up to your IT teams.
Yes.
And say, when you spool up a virtual machine for a Power BI Gateway, or if you're going to apply a Power BI gateway to a machine, you would want to ensure that only your tenant IDs are in the registry, so that as anybody setting things up, et cetera, just be part of your, I think, VM stand-up process.
Sure.
Just add it into the registry.
It's strange. Oh, I was going to say, it's just strange because I'm surprised they didn't do it in the config. There's a hidden file with like probably 50 other or at least 20 settings that you can change in the gateway. And it's like an XML, I think it's like .config gateway. I'm surprised they didn't put it there. I'm sure there's a reason, but it's kind of crazy that to protect your tenant, you have to go into the registry.
Well, you would like that doesn't. I guess it doesn't make sense to me because like the gateway is a service that you're applying to the VM, right? So in order to restrict the service from doing something, you need to tell it, can't do that.
Yeah, you don't want to go. You don't want to go into the service itself and say this is the only tenants I want you to talk to, because then it's like that defeats the purpose,
right?
To some degree. It also says here too, for one thing I was also worried about was, well, what if there is legitimately your company has multi-tenants for Power BI for whatever reason?
Multiple, yeah.
There is a comma separated GUID list of tenant IDs you could use. So you could have multiple tenants in this property. You just use a comma to separate them, and so you can have multiples too. Interesting. Great find on that one. Seth will always find the security loopholes on everything. That's like Seth is like security Seth.
There you go.
That's like your superpower.
Is it just one?
That's one of them. One of them. Walter White is your other superpower.
Yeah. Thank you. Just the way you look, Seth.
Just the way you look. That's your superpower.
Your face is a superpower.
Yeah, and Minecraft.
Oh. All right, let's move on to our main session today. The main topic for today is talking around Microsoft Fabric, and it could be Fabric, it could be Power BI, whatever you're talking about here. And we're going through an article written by Data Goblins. Kurt is just amazing, runs all these great articles, super well written, and I really liked particularly this article as I was reading through it. And the link's in the description for those who are going to try and follow along or read the article. This is a really interesting article. And I also like, one, Kurt, you're doing a great job of, there is a lot of content in the article, and he uses the accordion feature of his articles in a very elegant way. I was like, this is very well done, because sometimes you'll read a blog and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm scrolling forever. I don't know what information is important here. And there are certain things, like he really does lean into the user reading the article and saying, okay, I'm going to tell you all the details, but for those of you who don't need to know the accordion steps here, I'm going to give you like the too long didn't read TLDR of it and say, here's the things you need to set up this, and this. I, as an expert in Power BI, already understand those things. So I just glaze over those 4 bullet points, but they're fully expandable windows that you could say, well, if you didn't understand any one of those steps, you could accordion it out and see all the details, which again, very well written. Really like your thought, Kurt. The blog post is just incredible.
Couldn't agree more. It was one of the things that stood out to me as well.
Yeah. And maybe he's been doing this all along or refining the process as he goes, but I feel like really...
It was very noticeable in this one for some reason, right?
Yes, agreed.
And yeah, definitely thinking about the end user, how to compact or throw in all of the details without, to your point, Mike, just being this long scroll list of like, oh man, where's the heavy stuff? But
yes.
Yeah, Kurt's just fantastic.
And there used to be an external tool. I think it's actually in Business Ops of connecting Tableau to Power BI.
Correct. There is an external tool that would, and that's more around Business Ops. I think was connecting. There's a external tool that this basically handles I think it's a small file that's created, like a connection file that's made for Tableau. So that is used for, I have a data model. I have a semantic model locally on my computer. It's open in Power BI Desktop. I click that button, which then means Tableau can look at the cube that is local on your machine and can read it, and then automatically you can build visuals on top of Tableau locally on your machine. So let's get into the article. Let's maybe talk about first, what does this mean? What are we talking about here when we're talking about Tableau connecting to the semantic model in Power BI? I'll start off on this one, just very quickly to kind of give us a summary of a bit of the article. And then I think there are a couple key points here to pull out here that Kurt, I think, really illuminated very well. the concept of the semantic model is this is your relationship between your tables, your DAX measures, and your calculations. It's a cube that you can use. And the neat part about the cube is it's kind of general. You can use it anywhere. It could be used for Excel. It can be used for Power BI reports. And in this case, what the setup is, you publish a semantic model to the service. You then open up XMLA endpoints. So you have to be on something that is premium. So there's a premium feature to what this is looking like on how to connect to that cube. Once you have that premium feature open, you have to install some drivers on your machine. I think he said OLA DB or something like that, some kind of drivers that were required there. But once the OLA DB drivers were installed, you're then able to connect Tableau directly to the cube, and then you get your full data model as if you had built it. So the idea is there's one story of the truth. There's one cube that has a central definition of measures and things you want there, and then you can build reports off of that. So that, I think, is the setup for that. Initial thoughts, gentlemen, around connecting Tableau to Power BI or Fabric?
I think this goes back to some of our conversations on what Fabric opens up, and more importantly, that the semantic model and the Power BI report is no longer the end post of what we do. Everything we've done up until Fabric, and especially the Lakehouse, Power BI was really the last stop. It was the there's no outlet, so to speak, of what we're doing, what our transformations were. You're either building, you have to build this in Power BI. It's shown in Power BI, and the only extensions, the only turns were analyze in Excel or PowerPoint. But really, that model, it really existed as the last stop. What we're seeing more and more, and this is just another great example of it, that because of the semantic model, because of the semantic link, because of what Fabric's enabling for the business, and I'll go back to what you always say, Mike, it's becoming just one now. It has just another route where we have endless possibilities of what we can do with a transformed, structured model that we create in the same fashion, which I don't know if we know the potential of that yet. I don't know if we've really discovered all that's going to do for the business and how that's going to affect governance and how that's going to affect users and how that's going to affect the roles at a business.
That's a good point. I do think there's going to be some time here for people to kind of understand. Well, for one, this is a whole bunch of new features that just been thrown at business users. It's going to take them years to figure out what's the best practices for their organization, what's the best way to push and pull through Fabric. I'm hearing a lot of value from many organizations that want to get people into Fabric much sooner than they would be previously. So, this whole idea of direct lake pieces, I think there's a lot of pieces there, but, particularly talking around this Tableau and Power BI integration, I think it's interesting to me to think about the licensing that's required in order to get Tableau to bolt on to Power BI. Microsoft has clearly been making it easy for a pro user to build reports on top of the cube. As soon as you're adding this other tooling, you need to get after the XMLA endpoint, which, cool, but if you think about it, that's already a price barrier to a lot of organizations because other organizations may have a mix of pro users and some Tableau users mixed together. Well, this instantly pushes you towards a premium capacity. However, I will say this. If your model, and this is where it's a game that we play here, because in Kurt's section about halfway down, he starts talking about what kind of licensing do you need? You need a Power BI Pro license plus some sort of premium capacity, or just a Fabric capacity, which goes all the way down to a pricing of an F2. So you can go down to $280 per month if you buy it from Azure. Then there is this concept of a premium per user. So you could be a $20 a month per user workspace plus a user that has a premium per user license. So the workspace, so this is where Microsoft gets really confusing. I get a lot of questions around how does the Power BI licensing work? And there's like two layers of licensing. There's licensing at the user level and there's licensing at the workspace level or the capacity level. And I think this is very confusing to people, especially when you're talking about stuff like this. Any thoughts, Seth?
So we bring it into the conversation just to confuse you further. No.
No, I think it's something
I
worth
guess
talking about.
It is. I guess I have a question. Wasn't the semantic model already available to Tableau?
What do you mean by that? Previously, like
So there's two ways in which Kurt's talking about connecting Tableau to the semantic model. One is, well, actually two ways of connecting to data in the Microsoft ecosystem. One of those is semantic model, one is Fabric, right? Which is really just a SQL endpoint. Further
I
down,
see what you're saying. So you're saying also, okay, so there's also another SQL.
I was
got it.
I was under the impression that the semantic model was already available for Tableau.
It is. It's not. This is not a net new thing. This is just an article around kind of like this is something
Totally
that's been
get it.
existing for a while. Yeah,
Totally
correct.
get it. The context of the conversation threw me into a loop of like,
sorry,
is this new?
Not new. Just kind of something we've never really talked about.
Yeah, what strikes me is a really like kind of an organizational move by Microsoft, but also a brilliant one from the how it's represented here is not being a combatant competitor with other companies. And what that's done is open the door to these really unique partnerships, even partnerships to some degree, across the technology ecosystem that they play in, and created really unique, I think, solutions for the larger populace. And this is one of those things to me, because if you think about a lot of the conversations, Mike, when you and I were consulting together a long time ago, that people had were it was hard lines of Tableau versus Power BI. And I'm not saying that that's gone, but I certainly, the vehemence between those two things has like lessened over time, I think.
Yeah.
Because I think the conversation points that we kept hearing all the time were it's the business has to choose between one reporting platform and another. If you were going to store your data and do it in one way, like you were stuck in that ecosystem completely and you couldn't do anything. And what I think is the brilliant move is even with Fabric, and even I guess prior to that, even with the advent of Power BI and the semantic model being the Power BI thing, opening that up to a different reporting tool, as opposed to just saying, no, man, we're not going to let you connect to our engine. This is what separates Power BI and it makes it what it is. And we're not going to let your visualization to it. No, they open that door, and now I think help facilitate for businesses when they pick and choose where their data sits, what reporting tool they're going to use. Like, you're giving them options, and that's always a good thing. Always a good thing from the consumer perspective. I think it's new for sure, and maybe it's the advent of Satya in Microsoft, but certainly I welcome it, and I love the fact that Microsoft has adopted that in the analytics space as well, in opening up, like, yeah, you can do whatever you want with our ecosystem, like plug and play what works best for you. If you want to run both these tools at the same time, you can. Like, all of it revolves around the data itself, and we're not going to restrict you from accessing the data in any way.
So I mean, if I'm strategic around Microsoft, right? If we're thinking strategic about things, like, okay, fine, the output layer should be very generalized. The inner layer here of like the data, whoever owns that, like, this is one thing that I've found very core, especially even when you're building applications or web apps. Whoever owns the data is king of the hill. I mean, if there's something you want to own, okay, fine. The visualization tool can change. You can make different kinds of visual tools. Cool. But if you own the cube where all the data lives, if you own the design experience around how to create the things that you need in that initial area, that changes things a lot. Like that really puts the power in Microsoft's shop. Go ahead.
Let me not, I was going to say challenge, but I don't think it's a challenge. I think I would tweak that statement.
Okay.
I don't think, well, the tweak would be, I agree with the sentiment, but is it actually who owns the data, or is it actually who owns the business logic that transforms the data? Because what we've seen here, even with Fabric, is we don't care where your Delta table lives. We care how people are managing that data, and where all of that logic or where the pipelines are going.
Sure.
Maybe it's the whose computer you using.
I was going to say who controls the flow of the
Yes.
data.
Yeah.
I think yeah. And I think I would say maybe my view of that statement was too narrow, and what you're thinking about now aligns very well with kind of where I was going with that. Like it's more important for you to say, I own the business logic, I own the tooling, I own the cube where all this stuff lives. Whether it's, you know, a lot of business logic or a little bit, or just tables and relationships, I don't know. But whoever owns that becomes like the expert in that space, or you know, strategically, you become way more embedded in that area than, okay, well, what if, you know, Microsoft says, well, screw this Power BI reporting side thing doesn't really make much difference. Let's go back to the Excel team and just invest a lot more in there. I mean, I literally heard a interview. I was listening to some webinars recently, and I think Arun had made a comment inside the webinar that said there is over 1 billion users using the Microsoft M365 product suite. So this is Excel, Word, and PowerPoint. You're talking about 1 billion user opportunity. This is why they're so heavily bent on, let's get cubes and models and Power BI in the hands of those users. So it is in their best advantage. There's already, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of users inside Excel now, because that's part of the Office. You don't buy just Excel, you buy the whole suite. It's a package deal.
Yep.
So when you get it, now you get this Power BI thing in there as well, and it comes out for free. I mean, this is a huge opportunity for them to continue to grow this thing. And now there's going to be a lot more cubes rolling around.
I think I need to interject because I think you're both right. Because this is a very interesting topic, Mike, that who controls the data. I think you're completely right, but I think it's the context of, it doesn't have to be a database. It's the data that people trust, because it could very well be Excel, where all the data is the source of truth. And guess what? Those people control, they really do control a lot. Even if you have everything set up in a structured database, if a business is relying on this Excel file or this flow of the data, that's where people are going to go. So I think you're right, but I don't think it's necessarily always having to be in that structured pipeline. Because, and I think that's kind of been our goal too, is we're enabling the users, we're enabling the business to have more control of it, but at the same time, we're trying to build up that. Why do we always say migrate away from Excel for database or for analytics? It's not because we just don't like Excel. We love the Excel. But, you know, we're trying to create some guidelines around it. We're trying to create some structure around it. But there's a lot of organizations still to this day. You had the conversation a few weeks ago about JP Morgan and about, I mean, they're using Excel. And guess what? Their business is relying on Excel. So the tooling
100%.
and is just more about where the source of the truth is at that point.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, though, like and the examples you're giving are the automation that those tools allow you to do, right? And that's the important part, and why we lean into businesses and say, yeah, I mean, you're functioning. Nobody's questioning the numbers that you're putting together. What we're questioning is, why would you want to be doing that manually, right? Like it's opening it to error, right? So set the things, it works that way every single time data comes through. And I think like you're going to have decision points, right? Like even within the Microsoft ecosystem, you have multiple different ways in which to create ETL and ELT pipelines and all these different things. So like, I agree that like the data ownership, the data movement, having data accessible in many ways outside of Power BI is extremely important for a data culture as well. It's just serving up that information to users in many different ways as easily accessible as possible.
So I think that leads to another question, or a really good question. We talked about the downgrade of the Power BI tool as just another cog in the Fabric machine. It's just one of its pipelines, its notebooks, its Power BI reports. Do we want to then, if we're utilizing Fabric, and Fabric is again now just another avenue for all these other ways we can use the data? Do we want to encourage then less, I don't want to say less use of Power BI, but more use of other tooling or other avenues of reporting?
This is a great question. And this is one that was addressed inside Kurt's article that I think we should talk about, is because on. So the question is, should we look about other tools or other tools that may serve some purposes here? I think for me, it's a lot about use the right tool for the right situation kind of thing. And one of the notes he makes here is just be aware if you're trying to mix Tableau and Power BI together, based on what you're trying to do, there is some additional licensing costs because now you're not just paying for just Power BI, you're now paying for Power BI and another tool. So organization, like I'm literally Googling like what other things could connect to a cube. You could go to Click. Click also has a program that goes right into the cube. So you could have a Fabric cube where Click connects to it. Or, and something I didn't bring up earlier that Seth, you brought up was, I was thinking about connecting to the XMLA endpoint. The XMLA endpoint is the analysis services portion of Fabric. Yeah. There is a SQL endpoint as well. So you could also connect Tableau directly to the SQL endpoint and say, I'm going to go access just the SQL server portion of it and go request data directly from there. All of those implications change how much compute is used. It changes the pricing on like, because now I'm paying for Power BI and potentially I'm paying for something else. And the other thing I think is a weakness here is now when you start relying on other tools, you're now beholden to how efficient is that other tool in adding business rules and or logic around what's happening from that semantic model. So I think there's risks there from a cost perspective.
Yeah. I don't know if from a reporting perspective, it makes sense to me to have both Power BI and Tableau running at the same time, because to your point, Mike, licensing, there's also a knowledge factor. Like, but your teams would have to know one, unless it's like Tableau's in one part of the business and Power BI is in the other. The challenge with that is you're mixing up the user experience depending on where people are interacting with things.
Yeah.
And you also have to deal with multiple infrastructures, right?
Yes.
Multiple different ways in which to manage or which, how to deploy things or, so it's not without cost from a lot of different levels if you're mixing in. Where I think it's valuable is if you're in one and like you pick, it allows you to choose which reporting one you want, I guess is what I'm saying, or transition from Tableau into Power BI.
And there's a bit of reality here too. As cool as this is, there's no way you could roll this out to an enterprise, this workflow with Fabric without, to your point, incurring a lot of cost and a lot of finagling the model. There's a lot of things that also don't cross over, like calculation groups.
Well, I'm not gonna say no to your answer, Tommy. I think I agree with you. It's at the core. However, I think Kurt gets some really good examples of like why you would want to mix the two. And just some considerations around what would be the thought process around why we want to mix things, right? I think he gives some good examples here. Inside here, he talks about a little bit of you have a team, like you have multiple teams in the company. One portion of the company has just, to your point, Seth, earlier, the knowledge base is all built around Tableau. It's a Tableau thing. So since their knowledge base is all around Tableau already, instead of throwing away all their existing work, and you can say, look, you guys keep your tool. We'd like you to migrate onto Power BI, but in the meantime, we will build these QB things that the rest of the organization is going to use. You are more than welcome to continue to connect to them and use them. So I think there's this idea of like, you're in the process of migration and you are not quite fully ready to turn everything on for Power BI because it does take some time. I mean, Tableau is a really robust visualization tool. It's not a good data engineering tool. And I also would agree, it's not a really good place to store business logic. So, that's something that's as an admin of Power BI or an admin of just BI in general, if there's business logic being incorporated into those Tableau files, I'm not aware, again, this is probably me just being naive, I'm not aware of how would we scrape through all those Tableau files and extract out all the measures or things that we're doing that are business-based logic pieces that are inside the Tableau file itself. This is a risk. However, I feel much more confident now with what Power BI is coming out today. I can go rip through all of the PBIP files that we make, and I can go find all the measures that were created in the thin reports. So I have I feel like I have a better reporting back to the organization surface area of all the things that come out of Power BI. Where are they being used? I have better metrics around that because it's all in the same ecosystem. So I think I lose as an admin some visibility when I let Tableau run there. Kurt also brings up the point of you're like in the middle of a migration, and you're building net new Tableau reports because you just don't have time to rebuild them inside Power BI. So there's like this stopgap appearance that going in there as well. Would you agree with those kind of reasonings, Seth? Is there anything else I missed there that you would see why you'd want to have Tableau existing versus just all Power BI?
Well, I guess no, I don't have anything to add on that. I guess the initial reaction I had with Tommy's statement, though, is Tommy, you said, why would you deploy Fabric?
Why would you? I don't think this is realistic if you're trying to scale and say, okay, all of our Tableau, or the majority of what we're doing in Tableau, we're now going to point to Fabric. I think it works in circumstances. I don't think it works we can scale this up for all of our current Tableau that we're trying to migrate.
Well,
and because you're right, though, you have a good point. There's a lot of
depends.
Organizations that are using Tableau and Power BI. It's
usually, but Tableau has this method of like land and spread.
Mm-hmm.
They hit a team. Yeah. They make that team really happy. They provide a lot of support to that one person or that one team. And their goal is, once you land in one person, the goal is everyone's going to love this tool. Continue spreading it across the organization. So that is their approach to get it in and move it. Microsoft's approach is, we're just going to give it away for free with desktop to everyone. And because of that, people are like, well, I'll just figure it out and just kind of go from there. So I think there's two different strategies on how both companies are going to market.
Yeah, and I don't know, like the how do you migrate question is a harder one, because I'm not 100% familiar with like all of the tools around Tableau, but like Alteryx, like all the pushback I would have there is, it depends on the data sources and all of the stuff that you're doing to curate data for Tableau reports, because there's a lot of it that has to happen because it's not a model driven front end, right? There's a lot of things you can do in Power BI and in the ecosystem. So when we talk about Fabric, it's much more than just reporting. It's the enterprise tooling that just enhances what you could already do from an ETL perspective and modeling perspective in Power BI. And because of that, a lot of those connection points, like Kurt's article points out in the second half, are SQL based. So if like that's your basis for a lot of the Tableau reports, could you make an argument that you would be simplifying your life if you went the Fabric route, because all those services are combined? Like, that's the whole pitch of Fabric. We're taking all of, even in the Microsoft ecosystem, we're taking all of these services that were these independent things that you had to connect to, get permissions, have access to, etc., and we're combining them together where everybody can play.
Mm-hmm.
You have that and more in Tableau implementations, because it's third party, and they have these, you're just kind of creating your own web based on whatever person is saying, like, oh, yep, this is the tool we want, right? And then you plug it in. Oh, this is the tool we want, and then you plug it in. So it depends on like the sources of information. But if I'm a company and I'm looking at like, my data is going to scale and I need to grow anyway, could I choose Fabric as a backbone for that and then have options in the future? Sounds pretty compelling to me.
What you just said cannot be understated. I'm working with a client right now where it's Tableau, but it's also Alteryx for one team or for another department.
This is where I was going to go.
I mean, we thought we had the Wild West. At least it was just Power BI, right? I mean,
but how do you report on that? Like, to me, it's like Tableau isn't just a standalone product that does everything. It does it's purely the visualization side of things. And I think Power BI gets a bad rap because it gets lumped into this whole like, oh, it's just a visualization tool. No, it's not. It's a semantic modeling engine and a visualization tool, which you don't even get with like Tableau. You have to go buy other features of Tableau, or you buy an Alteryx, or you buy something else third party. And this is what I find with a lot of these other tools. A lot of tools don't have the entire story. They have portions of the story that they've done really well with, but not all of it. And also, if you try and embed, so one of the things we're talking about here is this is just buying, you even just to get desktop for Tableau, you got to pay for it. The desktop version is a paid feature. And if you want all the connectors, you pay more. So it's not a cheap program to begin with, just to get it on your PC. In addition to that, when you want to send those reports somewhere, Tableau server, that sucker is expensive. I was just talking with someone looking at getting Tableau server and embedding reports for an external application. they were talking $3 million per year to be able just to run Tableau for an embedded application that needed lots of users. But you're talking scale up things, like you're buying machines, you're putting it on VMs, you're doing. There's a whole bunch of extra price that goes with that.
Yeah.
And I think about, oh my gosh, how easy is it for me to then get to Power BI to embed into applications? Like when you're starting, it's so much faster.
See, but that
tricky.
is always well, and I've always worked in Microsoft tools, so obviously I'm biased. Speaking of bias, segue. I think Kurt does a fantastic job of like towing the line, and he calls it out multiple times. He's like, I don't want to get into a Tableau versus Power BI thing.
That's true. That's
like,
very true.
I'm trying to stay in the middle here.
Yes.
One of the things that I think has been compelling and why I was a huge Microsoft fan and Power BI fan right out of the gate with this one is it was model based. It was solving all of these other underlying problems that are still massive problems for a tool like Tableau. All of the curated tool. How do you connect all these things? How do you merge and transform? And like, it's a precursor to all of the other stuff I want to do, right? So to me, that model based approach versus the report based tool approach, I think is, like Kurt lays out really well, the significant difference between the two. But something I've always thought Power BI had, because Power BI had that, it was a much stronger tool, like to scale within an organization and leverage in the ways that we see Microsoft taking advantage of it.
And I think as we're going through this, and I'm looking at the documentation, I'm looking at the capabilities, all well and good that you can do this. But if I was a consultant and I was like, this is the migration factor, I don't think this would be my recommendation, because the cost would be probably the biggest one. Oh, you're already using Tableau. Now we're going to build on top of this Fabric licensing just to showcase what Fabric can do. That's not a really great selling point because you're already incurring a lot more cost.
I think
on the migrate. If I want to migrate eventually people from Tableau to Power BI, and one of the ways we're doing that is, well, we don't have time to change our reports from Tableau to Power BI. Why don't they just connect to the semantic model in Fabric? We're going to build that and showcase what Fabric can do from a semantic modeling point of view.
Time out.
Okay.
What in this scenario, what is the business problem that you're trying to solve?
If we're trying to migrate from Tableau,
why are you trying to migrate?
That's what we do.
No, that's not a business problem.
No, that is not.
What is the business problem? Cost. Is your solution?
Cost the driver? One of them. Is your data all over the place the driver, and nobody has any control or understanding of what data is going into any of those reports? Like, what is there has to be a key driver for you to take on a migration or a POC, or for you to move anything into a different platform.
You could take one of the 10 reasons why people are migrating today. Cost.
That's a cop out, but okay.
No, absolutely. No, I'll name all 10 if you would like. So, and you can pick and choose from the menu. The cost.
Regardless, though, I think your view on things. We don't need to go on all the 10 reasons why, but I think your high level. You're looking at it from an enterprise, centralized team perspective. I think you're undervaluing the amount of political horsepower that comes with getting everyone to move onto the same thing. And also, there have been, in larger organizations, there are teams dedicated or have been solely focused on getting wins around things that have been solely built in Tableau. So I'm not about to discredit those teams and that amount of work and effort that has been there. There is physically a gap in knowledge between what we've been doing in Tableau and what we can do in Power BI, because the team skill is not there yet. Plus, some organizations don't care about centralized cost looking at all their BI tools. They're focused more on each business unit has their level of spend. And so my argument to some degree here is, if there's a team that's generating revenue and they've decided as a team, they're going to be, their revenue is part of that will pay for Tableau because that's how their team operates. Yes, I would agree. We probably should all think about how could we plan to get towards Power BI. It will help us out. But that team will have to integrate potentially with other teams across the organization, get data from other things. If I'm the central team, I'm going to try and build semantic models that help me distribute that.
Well, allow me then to refine my declaration,
Excuse me.
to speak, which may help. in many of the scenarios, the cost does not seem to outweigh the value of approaching things where we're connecting to a semantic model, where if we're doing this particular situation outlined in the article. I don't know where the value outweighs the cost, both from time, any switching, and just monetary cost. That's what that's trying what I'm wanting to state here. There are great.
Okay, so if it's
yeah,
sure, I guess if it's an open like if we're in an all or nothing, right? I think the value is you could have a few data sources that you're going to create semantic models around because you need to shape and combine the data, understanding and knowing, having the skill set to be able to do that on the Power BI side, and or work with a Tableau team. There's value there. I think the main drivers for cutover would be something like, okay, your organization is starting to play in the lake. You have big pipelines that you're starting to run because you're pushing through a lot more data. So you're already looking at platforms that can support that. And there's many of them, many different services that you can plug into, many different service providers, Microsoft, Amazon, etc. Right? So world is your oyster. In ways where you would select something like Fabric is, as an option, like, and I'm not talking Fabric right now. I'm talking Fabric like 6 months, like when it goes GA, when it's fully baked, etc. That's a compelling offering from the standpoint that, wait a minute, you're telling me I can get all these services all in one, and I don't have to migrate off of Tableau right away. Long-term strategy, we may, but I can get my pipelines, I can store my data in the right way, I can connect to this, like that to me is something that gets thrown in the mix as a potential solution. Because without that, then like in the Microsoft world, and I'm sure there's the AWS world as well, but Microsoft world, it's okay, I don't need to go grab the ADF service, I don't need to stand up a lake, I don't need a third party like Databricks, I don't need all of these other things that are problematic for large organizations or small to just manage, implement correctly, connect, blah blah blah. You get all that in one package. But there is and the cost is, and this was my other point, Tableau and the costs of Tableau are the report. And what I can say is Power BI and the costs associated to it are the ecosystem of data. It's the ETL, it's the models that are supported all the time. It's the reporting, it's the how many other enterprise services under here that I can also leverage in different ways. And all of the sudden, that makes a lot more sense, especially if I'm undercutting my competitors by X, right?
Yeah.
Because now I would be moving to a platform that is accessible to other tools and gives me options, versus what those current solutions are is I've picked this thing and it's the only thing I can use, which is speaking from a naive view of not plugging into all those systems. So I'm sure there's capabilities of moving, pushing data in different ways. However, semantic models are a thing that I think have been proven to be the industry leading standard as far as like speed, efficiency, and serving up data in the ways that we would need to from an analytics perspective.
So one thing I'll just note here from a Tableau perspective that I've observed when I've seen Tableau show up from companies, and I'd be willing to confirm this with you guys as well. When I see Tableau appear for users, typically there's another team that is sourcing or providing the data, or the Tableau team themselves have purchased another tool in addition to Tableau, like an Alteryx or something else that is shaping data. So in my opinion, Tableau is already kind of primed in a way to cut themselves out of the ecosystem, because they don't have, so what Fabric is giving us is more control further upstream to do data engineering things that we may want. That's stuff that we're now giving to the business potentially to have them do their own data engineering to some degree. And it's all part of the same pricing, the same tool, it all bolts together. So that's just my observation. Have you seen the same thing with Tableau when you've seen it out in companies?
No, I've seen the mix of the people who are building Tableau are also skilled in a tool like Alteryx.
Okay, but
Wait,
they are
They-
and
learning
why
another
is that?
tool.
yeah, they're learning another tool.
Because it's very visual based. It's very
Right.
drag and drop. It's very I
Yeah.
see my pipeline. It's whatever.
Yep.
Where I think in the very near future that changes is how fast and how well Microsoft can implement Copilot across Fabric.
Ooh, that's a good point.
Because why would I have business and this is the prep of all that, right? Like I think you compile all these services and they've even talked about Copilot here, Copilot there, Copilot here, and we already know what ChatGPT can do on LLMs, et cetera, et cetera.
It's true.
Like I want to create a pipeline that sources data from this table here. I want you to transform it. I want you to do this. There's your pipeline.
Wow.
Tell me that's not, it's absolutely feasible
Killer.
because it's already done in Databricks. There've always been there have already been demos where people are like, I thought Tommy, you did one where somebody was no. It was a different MVP posted on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Watch, I can transform watch this engine, and I thought it was the Databricks one, can transform data. I just keep talking to it like this, and it's building my own pipeline. So I think what we all know about AI is the barriers for technical entry are going to be lower, and who are the subject matter experts of a business area that understand how you need to transform data. It's the business user.
It's the business
The
user.
data steward. It's the person who is the one cobbling stuff together right now that could be the one that is determining okay, here are my data sets. I want you to do these things to them, and show me the output. And then I'm going to analyze it. Oh, yep, that's exactly what I need. Now I'm going to say, go create me a report. And I want you to show me this, this, and this.
The whole time you're talking, I'm trying to figure out a way to argue with you or to counterpoint, but
There is none.
My OpenAI just had their big conference and they have this thing called GPT. Man, you're right.
Tommy sent me a video, and it's impressive what the thing's doing now.
What ChatGPT can do now, and what you can build as a business user. And it's a really, really great point here that you're right. When Copilot, and not just Copilot, but when just what people are probably going to build for these migrations too, not just necessarily Microsoft, but what we could build, our explicit measures podcast GPT that we could build that help with the migration, what it can feed in. I mean, we're only moving in that direction. Don't forget, OpenAI has only been around for 12 months.
Yeah.
Right. So
wow.
Yeah.
What?
Yes.
Well, no.
They released it last year.
Publicly available.
Released a publicly
ChatGPT.
available version.
ChatGPT has been around for a year.
It's been rolling for a while.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's not like they just developed the code last year.
Yeah.
But ChatGPT was available this time last year, or just became available. So we are very, very incredibly early in the stages of what AI is going to be able to do, and how we can feed it and what the workflow looks like. That's a great point, Seth. And I'm, like I said, I wanted to argue so much, what about this? Or it's like, well, and again, we know it's not going to solve everything. However, it's going to be a great, at least, framework for someone to build what they want. And then, maybe having someone else look at it. But I mean, there's a lot of good things coming.
So let's try and do it. I think we've done a good job of kind of in diving into Tableau, thinking about where that fits. There's a lot of other tools that bolt onto the semantic model piece. I think Microsoft is making the right decision here. Random question my son asked me the other day, and Tommy, I'll see if you know this because you are a huge ChatGPT fan. What does GPT stand for? I see it all the time.
I know the first one is generated.
I had to go Google it because I did not know what the moniker GPT stands for.
I know the first word is generated. I cannot tell you the other.
So I had to Google it again because I forgot the phrase. Generative pre-trained transformers. That's what the GPT stands. I'm like, really? I thought it was something else. Yeah, they just abbreviated it and threw it together and stuck a little chat GPT. That's the whole moniker there. Anyways, cool technology. We'll be interested to see where that goes with Copilot. I'm very excited to see what Microsoft announces. I believe there's a lot of announcements going to be happening here or have happened already at Ignite. So that will be, if you haven't watched it already, go back and check it out. Ignite should be a very interesting event where Microsoft is going to go a lot deeper in what their plans are around things, data and AI based things in general. With that, I just want to say thank you very much. Oh, before we do that, I forgot. I'm skipping ahead here. We should do final thoughts. So this article on Power BI, semantic models, any final thoughts? Let's do a quick wrap up here. Tommy, what's your final thought looking at this one?
I think we're moving more and more in a direction where other tooling besides just Microsoft's straight tooling in around business and data, business intelligence and data is going to become more prevalent and more accessible. Something that we should all keep our minds open to, and maybe even look into the general skill set.
Cool. Seth, what are your final thoughts on this this kind of topic?
Final thoughts, check out Kurt's article. He does a much better job than our hackery of discussion around it in describing how you can access and utilize Tableau. Has the tutorials, has the whatever. Kurt, you're doing a fantastic job. Thank you for all the content. And I think Microsoft is making all the right moves, not only now in integrating and working with other tools, but I'm excited to see where things lead in the future.
I would kind of say I think the latter point here on this one was really impactful to me. So I think your point around what's the business use case for this? Why would you want to migrate on or off of Tableau? It's going to be a very important question for organizations as they try to think through what is the best. And I think the main reason organizations start centralizing on a tool is cost. I think that's one of the main drivers of getting costs down. There's a lot of hidden costs that come along with that. Education of your users, building it out, start standing up new things, right? You're potentially rebuilding a couple of things you've already previously built in other systems. So I would say from a final thought standpoint, think about why you want to migrate away, or think about the cost implications of why you need to keep around other tools, Click, Tableau, whatever that looks like, and think through strategically, where does it make sense to best spend your effort around managing your BI space? And I think you'll find that there's some compelling lower cost solutions out there than you have today, potentially. So that's kind of the reason why we all have jobs, is to continue to optimize and bring down costs, right? You don't pay for consultants. And Seth, you're full time on this one, but you don't pay for people to come in and like design systems unless it's at a lower cost than if you didn't take that effort or take that time. All right. Well, that will wrap up here. Thank you very much for your time, your listenership, your ears. We thank you. This is a fun, 50 minutes of talking about random things. We appreciate you engaging with the conversation. Please, if you don't mind, if you like this conversation, please make sure that you share this with somebody else. Let somebody else know that this was a content that you liked engaging with. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us in Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. Do you have a question, idea, or topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. Finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all of Power BI Tips social media channels.
Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.